Most pop groups come and go, enjoying but a fleeting moment in the spotlight. Some stand the test of time. Then there are the Beatles. No band has had the same impact. No artist can match the body of work they left behind. No performer has had such an influence on the generation of musicians that followed. In 1963, 4 young Liverpudlians had the British pop scene in the palm of their hand. Within months, they were the biggest thing on the planet, and for the next 6 years, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison and Ringo Starr ruled the show business world. Homage was paid in delirious screams, and when the Beatles held court, everyone listened. Entertainment royalty meant the real thing on more than one occasion, and their refreshing personalities and boyish, playful charms were as infectious as their music. Where others might have tried to repeat a winning formula, the Beatles were only interested in forward momentum, continually expanding their horizons. As their music became more complex, the Fab Four also looked very different as the decade wore on. In an era of peace and love, every Beatle marriage left female fans bereft. The Beatles' reign ended with their abdication at their choosing. They were as big at the time of the dissolution in 1970 as they were when Beatlemania swept the globe. For the impact they made, for the golden legacy they bequeathed to us all, and for the influence they had on other musicians, they stand apart from all other artists. What had been ephemeral and disposable became a transcendent gift to those who lived through the swinging 60s and to future generations. Theirs is an extraordinary story, a long and winding road from Love Me Do to Let It Be. The Cavern Club in Liverpool became the epicentre of a musical and cultural explosion. In the months following their Cavern debut in February 1961, the Beatles made key decisions that shaped their future. They engaged Brian Epstein as their manager, a businessman who could open the right doors. They reshaped their image, ditching the leather and slick-back hair in favour of sharp suits and mop-top. They also settled on a lineup that had undergone many changes since John and Paul's first meeting in 1957. With Ringo's recruitment and a recording deal in place, the Fab Four were ready to take their music far beyond their home city. While debut single Love Me Do brought immediate chart success, the 1963 releases delivered a chart stranglehold. She Loves You dominated the summer airwaves, one of 4 smash hit singles, and with 2 #1 albums bookending the year, the Beatles became the hottest ticket on the circuit. They played to a punishing schedule, keen to make every minute count in a notoriously fickle business. Even when they weren't top of the bill, it soon became apparent who the fans had come to see. Their overseas tour to Sweden in October 1963 was very different from the early days in Hamburg's seedy clubland. In the eye of the storm, John and Paul also had writing deadlines to meet, often snatching moments on buses or in hotel rooms to reel off another Lennon-McCartney gem. In November 1963, the band had their most prestigious booking to date, on the bill of the Royal Variety Performance.
Paul, have you thought about your act for the show yet? Any changes in the act, or is it going to be, the usual routine?
No, we'll have to change it, I'm sure. We can't... No, stop it. We'll have to change it, but we can't do the same thing all the time. We haven't thought about what we're going to do yet.
Suits with collars on? Brush party in
never
hair?
Know.
Something like that?
We may not wear suits. Never know. We've no idea.
John, in this Royal Variety show, when you're appearing before royalty, your language has got to be pretty good, obviously. This thing about Ted, he's saying that he couldn't distinguish.
I can't understand
the
Teddy.
Queen's English.
I can't understand Teddy saying that at all, really. I'm not going to vote for Ted.
But you're not going to change your act just for the Lord Privy
Oh
Seal?
no, like we'll keep like the same kind of thing, like won't we?
Oh, well, yes.
Yeah, that's
man.
right.
Not even royalty could eclipse the Beatles, who wowed the mature audience and showed they had cross-generational appeal. Their infectious music, clean-cut image and irreverent wit won over the parents, even if they left the delirious screaming to the kids. The frenzy of the concert hall spilled out onto the streets. The group had experienced such wild outpouring as early as 1960 on their home ground. Now, the contagion had reached the capital. The Beatles were, as the Cavern's resident DJ put it, the stuff that screams were made of.
What's it like with these fans outside, Paul?
At first, it's murder, because, you know, it looks as though they're going to tear you apart. Once you get the hang of it, you get used to it, and I think it gets a bit easier.
Have you ever been in physical danger from your fans?
Well, occasionally, yes. Only when there's been a big mob, you know, a really big one. But usually they're quite nice if there's only a few at a time when you meet them.
Yeah. What is it? Do you deliberately try and create these sort of screaming reactions?
No, we just, you know, arrive at the theatre and they're always there waiting. And whenever we're doing a show, the police always come and say, don't look out the window, you know, because you excite them.
Less than 2 years had passed since Decca had signed the Tremolos instead of the Beatles. And 12 months earlier, producer George Martin had been wary of releasing Lennon and McCartney's own composition, Love Me Do. Now they were top of the tree. Fans queued for days to secure a ticket to a show, but listening and quiet appreciation weren't high on the agenda. And if they happened upon the Fab Four outside a venue, it was as if they had licensed to grab any souvenir, anything worn, signed or even touched by a Beatle.
They're queuing up in Lime Street in the heart of Beatleland, where a Liverpool hair salon is offering customers a chance to change their current coiffure to the Beatle cut, and that's a cut above average. And it's another illustration of the surge of Beatlemania that's sweeping the teenage world. A chance for everyone who thinks the Beatles are fab to let hysteria go to their head as well as their larynx. The group who've confirmed their fantastic race to stardom with an appearance at the Royal Variety performance have certainly turned Liverpool into Britain's answer to any pop trends from across the Atlantic. Thanks to a hairdo, you too can be like Paul or Ringo and face the world from beneath a Beatle brow.
At the start of 1964, the Beatles had little time to reflect on the events of the previous year. The diary for the next 12 months was already filling up, the band members happily accepting the frenetic schedule set by Brian Epstein. They arrived in Paris in January 1964, with their latest single and album releases dominating the charts. The new single, I Want to Hold Your Hand, knocked She Loves You off top spot, while their second LP, With the Beatles, replaced their first, Please Please Me, in the album chart. One Beatles record displacing another became a familiar occurrence. Opportunities to record were scarce, and the breakneck speed of the performing schedule was matched in the studio. 10 tracks were recorded in a single session to complete Please Please Me. The follow-up long player represented a few days' work, shoehorned between other engagements. Every couple of months, they were also being pressed for a new single. The Beatles took it all in their stride. Parisian audiences were rather more restrained than those at home, but France was not the key market when it came to making an international splash. Breaking America was the objective. Behind the scenes, Epstein had been working feverishly to put the Beatles in America's shop window. On their return from Paris, the group reflected on that experience and the forthcoming trip to the country that had been a graveyard for many British artists.
They're funny, you see. There are more boys than girls, and we miss the good old screams.
Yeah.
But there are quite a lot of shouts. But
You mean they actually listen to you? That's the difference, is it?
yeah.
What's the French electrical supply like over there?
It's good, actually. All the equipment's great, but on the first night, as you may know, we had a bit of trouble because we suddenly found there was a radio program just sort of plugging into everything, and they'd overloaded all the amps and everything. It was boom.
What's the sort of stuff they like over there on the parade?
Wilder stuff, I think. We stuck in a Wilder number, to finish off with. Gone with the Wind.
They go for the Elvis Presley type of stuff, do they? I mean, they go for the old rock and roll stuff?
I think so, yeah, a bit more. It depended really who was in. It depended upon who was in. I can't speak.
You think
Speaking French so much, you see.
What?
Je me lève cette heure.
Yeah. You brushed up your French, have you?
No, kidding, I can't speak a word of it.
You still can't speak a word?
No. John's very good. Bonsoir and all that sort of stuff. He's very good.
I hear that you're going to give some poetry recital. I hear you're going to give some poetry recital.
Beethoven's poems.
Well, when's this? At the City of London Festival. I heard that you.
Yeah, he knows. You see, it's a secret. Don't tell anybody.
What poems you going to give?
Beethoven's. You remember him? Beethoven.
Looking forward to this American trip. Have you had any reaction over there? You got any fan clubs going? Is there
Well, there's one supposed to be started, and they're getting quite good response, 12,000 letters a day.
But the Beatle movement's going over there.
Yeah, you can even be a Beatle booster, folks.
Yeah.
50
I must
cents.
tell you, by the way, that Detroit University have got to stamp out the Beatle movement.
I know.
We've
heard about
You've heard about that?
Detroit.
They think your haircuts are un-American.
Well, it was very observant of them, because we aren't American, actually.
True that.
True.
Epstein had been wary of committing to an American tour until the Beatles had gained traction in the country's charts. The teething troubles of the Paris shows were forgotten as they heard the news that I Want to Hold Your Hand had reached #1 on the US Cashbox chart. On the 7th of February, the Beatles arrived at JFK Airport to scenes as enthusiastic as those that routinely greeted them at home. On the evening of Sunday, the 9th of February, America was given its first taste of the Beatles in performance mode. Epstein had pulled off a major coup in negotiating a spot on the Ed Sullivan Show. The fee for the 2 live appearances was modest, which left Sullivan content that he'd booked a top-draw British act for peanuts. Epstein was less concerned with money than prime-time exposure on one of America's top-rated shows. A television audience of 73 million, more than the entire population of the UK, ensured both parties were well satisfied. From being instrumental in setting a new record for an American TV audience, the Beatles played their biggest live show to date at Washington Coliseum. A $12,000 fee for a 12-song, 35-minute set more than made up for the cut-price Sullivan Show deal. By the time the Beatles made their second live appearance on network television, broadcast from Miami, America had fallen under the spell of the Fab Four. In the weeks following their return to the UK, Beatles records, old and new, stormed the Billboard chart. At one stage, they occupied the top 5 places in the Hot 100, a record unmatched by any artist before or since. Those numbers meant big money. Brian Epstein returned home with a royalty check for $250,000, issued by the group's American distributor, Capitol Records. Capitol had rejected the early Beatles singles, a decision that seemed vindicated as they bombed when released on various minor labels. Now, however, the Beatles were the jewel in Capitol's crown.
What did you most like about the trip, Ringo?
Oh, I just loved all of it, especially Miami. The sun, I didn't know what it meant until I went over there.
Don't you get it up in Liverpool?
No, they finished up there, Cut it out.
Did you ever have a chance, John, to
just get away on your own without anybody recognising you?
We borrowed a couple of millionaires' houses, you know.
Well, we did. You could afford to buy a couple of millionaires' houses, couldn't you?
Yeah, we'd sooner borrow them, it's cheaper. And we did a bit of water skiing. Well, sort of, anyway.
Yeah, we had a great time.
Did your wife enjoy it over there?
Yeah, she loved it. Who?
Shh, don't tell him he's married. It's a secret.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to. What about the taste of the fans over there? Did you find the same stuff?
You never been. Yeah.
We expected them to be very different, but they weren't at all.
Yeah.
The accent was the only thing, it was the only difference. Lovely.
Did they reckon you sang in an English accent or American?
No, some fella said, how come because you're from Britain and you still sing an American accent or something? So funny. We've been trying to explain to him that it's a Liverpool accent.
You know, but he wouldn't believe it.
He kept it, it's funny.
When you came back from France, you told me that they liked the sort of quicker numbers.
Yeah.
But what did you do? You just do all the same routine as you do here?
Yes,
because the records that are hits over there are the ones that are hits.
Oh yeah, we had
here.
to do Please Please Me over there.
Yeah.
And we haven't been doing that for a long time here, but it's in the charts.
That's history here.
Yeah.
What about the Beatles styles, all these wigs and suits and things? Are they catching on over
Yeah, they're selling well.
I hear anyway that the four of you are going to be millionaires by the end of the year.
That's nice.
Have you got time? Have you got time to actually spend this money?
What money? He said.
Doesn't he give any to you?
No. Have you seen that car of his?
You're fired.
One of the things you did was visit Clay.
No.
One of the things you did was visit
Spitting on me.
Cassius Clay.
He's a big lad.
Who's going to win? Clay Liston.
Ringo.
I'll win him. Okay.
But
Well, it all depends, you see. If you go to his gym, you have to say he wins. And if you go to Liston's gym, you say Liston will win. The big lad gym.
Jim will win.
I think Liston will win, but Cassius Clay's a good singer.
He's a good singer.
But he told us, he's
He's
Chubby
the greatest.
Checker's cousin.
He made up a poem as well.
Yeah.
This one of the things that have been reported over here in the British Embassy. What actually happened in Washington at this place?
Well, we just sort of went. Excuse me. We just went up to this sort of embassy party given by this lord. And
The British ambassador.
Davy.
he was a lord, isn't he?
Davy.
Lord.
Oh, Lord.
Well, and we went up to his house, and there was it was a bit hectic, and we judged the bingo or something.
But what about this business of somebody coming up and cutting your hair?
Oh, it was him.
Tell them about it. Whereabouts?
At the back, can you see? Look how short it is now.
It's a terrible lot.
I know. Oh my God! If
Were you
I'd have caught
short?
him. Pardon? No. I just looked round and you just saw all the faces.
In March 1964, barely a week after their return from America, the Beatles began shooting their first movie. Getting into character was easy enough as the script required them to play themselves in a storyline about the group heading to London to do a show. Delivering sharp one-liners played to their strengths, and it was an off-script throwaway from Ringo after a long day's shooting that gave the film its title. It had been, said Ringo, a hard day's night, and within 24 hours John had written the title track. After their first feature film premiered in July at the London Pavilion, studio backers, United Artists, scored a double bullseye, not only obtaining a gold-plated soundtrack album, but also a film that was both a critical and box office hit. Without breaking step, the Beatles moved from film set to TV studio to concert hall, and by June were back at Abbey Road Studios to finish A Hard Day's Night, as well as dashing off a 4-track EP to meet the relentless demand for product. John wrote the lion's share of the songs on the new album, but the standing arrangement meant every composition went out under the Lennon-McCartney banner. The Midas touch extended far beyond music. Sketches and knockabout comedy were all introduced as the Mop Tops bridged the gap between pop stars and household entertainers. The first noteworthy solo departure by a band member came in the literary field. Since his school days, John had been interested in the surreal, writing nonsense verse and comic stories full of inventive wordplay. In his own right, a collection of these flights of fancy prompted comparisons with Lewis Carroll, and James Joyce when John and Cynthia celebrated its publication in spring 1964. Books and acting were peripheral activities. The core business would always be music. 4 individuals in a tight collective doing what they did best. When Ringo was hospitalised with a throat infection on the eve of a world tour in June 1964, the Inner Circle admitted a new member. Jimmy Nicol added his name to the list of 5th Beatle claimants. Nicol was an accomplished session drummer who played with Georgie Fame as well as fronting his own band, but this was of a different order of magnitude altogether. In a matter of hours, the 24-year-old Londoner went from obscurity to laying down the beat for songs known the world over. Mastering the material was the easy part. The business of being a Beatle was so much more than mere technical proficiency. It was about style, personality, and group dynamics. Nicol carried it off as well as could be expected in a whirlwind 11-day period that took in Denmark, Holland, Hong Kong, and Australia. The reception in Holland showed that the fans were wildly happy to see even 3/4 of the group perform. Nicol became a fringe member of a close inner circle, welcomed but never fully admitted. The collegiate spirit within the group was extremely strong, yet there were competitive forces at work. The days when John and Paul engaged in collaborative songwriting sessions with equal contributions became an ever-dwindling memory. More typically, each would bring new material to the studio. Solo compositions were masked by the standard Lennon and McCartney credit, but each was aware of who was ahead in the race to claim the A-sides. While Ringo was content to play drums and take the occasional lead vocal, George's songwriting aspirations were blunted by John and Paul's creative dominance. It would be years before a Harrison song was elevated beyond an album filler, his frustrations increasing with his growing stockpile of material. Ringo joined the tour in Melbourne, and the set list was once again able to include a number where he took lead vocal honours. Nicol's moment in the spotlight was over. The group's only visit to Australia took fan worship to new extremes. A nighttime landing didn't deter the crowds, but things went far beyond excited cheering when thousands besieged their Melbourne hotel. Even with military backup, the police struggled to contain the situation. The price of fame was not cheap. The Beatles drew breath after the Australian leg of their world tour, with America and Canada still to come. Opening proceedings at San Francisco's Cow Palace on the 19th of August, they crammed 26 shows into a month, crisscrossing the continent at a dizzying rate. They even sacrificed a rare rest day when a tycoon offered $150,000 to add Kansas City to the schedule. The biggest names in entertainment might earn $15,000 for a night's work, putting this new record fee for a single show into perspective. It was all over in 31 minutes. In business terms, it was not the wisest decision, failing to cover its costs. Other entrepreneurs did better. One bought some of their hotel bed linen, cut it into 1-inch squares, and sold them at a healthy profit. The North American tour turned the Beatles into a stadium band. The UK venues were not on the same scale, but the days of the intimate environment of the Cavern Club, where they were within touching distance of the fans, were long gone. 18 days after returning home, they were on the road again, this time a British tour that added over 50 more shows to the total in what was already an extraordinarily demanding year. 2 houses per night was the norm, an arrangement that fell well short of satisfying demand, but at least left fewer fans disappointed. Thoughts also turned to the next album, required for the Christmas market, despite the fact that A Hard Day's Night was in the middle of what would be a 20-week run at number 1. Work had begun on the new long player in August, before they left for America. Writing new material, recording and performing had to be juggled, and something had to give. The 14-track album included 6 covers, although the Lennon and McCartney songs still held sway in a collection whose title was a wry comment on their status as a money-making machine. Beatles for Sale. Ringo had his second hospital stay of the year in December 1964. A routine tonsillectomy was big news when the tonsils in question belonged to a Beatle.
Hello, Ringo. How are you? How did you enjoy your stay in hospital?
Oh, it was nice, thanks.
How did you get on with the nurses?
Not so bad, you know. Very nice nurses.
Were you a model patient,
You better ask the nurses about that.
What did you dislike about being in hospital?
Nothing really, because I had to go in, so, you know, I just sort of settled down and read and played records and got used to it again.
How's your voice feel now?
Not so bad. I don't think it's changed, do you?
Could we hear it?
Hello? Hello, everybody.
A bit of singing, perhaps?
No, not a bit of singing. It's bad enough when I have music.
What do you think about this rumour of George being married?
He's not married, because he came in to see me and he told me. Believe me, he's not married. None of us are.
Denial of relationships had been an ongoing game. With any pop idol, it was better for business to be single and available. With the Beatles, doubly so. To smitten teenage girls, they were selling not just music, but a dream. It was a pipe dream, at least as far as John was concerned. He'd married Cynthia Powell in August 1962, before the release of Love Me Do, and became a father when Julian was born in April the following year. On the road, John carried on with the business of being a rock star, keeping his family firmly under wraps. Romance was also in the air for George. Ironically, it came on the set of A Hard Day's Night, which quite deliberately gave the Fab Four no love interest. George and Pattie Boyd, who played a schoolgirl in the film, became inseparable. Paul and actress Jane Asher were also an item, but it was the oldest Beatle who next broke a million hearts.
Hello? How are you?
Like Cynthia, Maureen was pregnant when she and Ringo were married in February 1965.
Congratulations.
Thanks a lot. I may shake your hand as you congratulate me.
Congratulations too, Mrs. Starkey.
I'm still not used to that yet, you know.
Are you really going to get a honeymoon?
No, I don't think so. Not with the likes of you chaps around.
No, are you thinking of a honeymoon?
Well, this was supposed to be it, but it didn't work.
Well, for how long was it supposed to be?
Well, I have to start work on Monday, so I was going back Sunday or Monday, you know.
Presumably met Ringo before the group were very successful, did you?
Yes.
Did you expect he was going to become a public monument like this?
Well, in Liverpool I did.
Yeah.
I didn't think sort of more or less all over the world, you know.
Does that worry you, that the fact that, you know, you can't go anywhere with him?
No, not really. I just sort of enjoy myself.
Do you intend to keep out the limelight like Mrs. Lennon, for example, John Lennon's wife?
Well, I don't like reporters and things.
She's on our side.
The proposal and arrangements were made just a few weeks before, which meant there was one notable absentee at Caxton Hall Register Office.
John and Paul, John and George were at the wedding and they were made up, you know. They're happy, but we don't know about Paul yet because he's away on holiday.
He hasn't been in contact. Did he know you were getting married?
No.
Where is he?
He's away.
Do you know where?
Yes, but I'm not telling him. Well, you might as well have a bit of peace. I'm not getting it.
The month in which Ringo and Maureen tied the knot saw the Beatles embark on their second feature film. Help had a bigger budget, exotic locations and Technicolor. Unlike their debut feature, this was madcap fiction, a fantasy romp whose plot turned on the quest for a magic ring. Ringo was the natural actor of the group, the movie set allowing him, for once, to outshine his bandmates. The film premiered in London in late July, a week ahead of the album. Any Beatles release was a cultural event. The fans had two to savour in a matter of days. The soundtrack's first single, Ticket to Ride, had reached number 1 in April, and the second, which shared its title with the movie, was on its way to top spot. As had been the case with A Hard Day's Night, the film's title wasn't decided upon until well into the shoot. In both instances, John wrote a song to order. But help was also a very real plea, Lennon's dissatisfaction and insecurities adding new depth to his songwriting. The virtual rerun of 1964 continued with a whistle-stop European tour ahead of the summer's main business, a return to America. The shows in France, Italy and Spain were not all sellouts, the first sign that Beatlemania was beginning to decline. It couldn't come quickly enough for the group, for whom the downside of reaching the top was starting to make an impact. They were prisoners of their own success. Their musicianship suffered in the deafening cacophony of the concert arena. Already they were experimenting with new studio techniques, widening the sound palette in a way that was increasingly difficult to recreate live. In America, fan worship was as strong as ever. Over 300,000 packed out the 16 shows the Beatles played in summer 1965. Only the biggest venues needed apply, and they came no bigger than New York's Shea Stadium, where over 55,000 saw the Beatles open the tour on the 15th of August. It was a world record for a pop concert, but it was an unrewarding experience for the performers, who arrived at each venue by armoured car and departed the same way as soon as the last bow was taken. The accolades took an elevated turn in 1965, as the Beatles were named in the Queen's Honours List. In terms of recognition, the establishment was catching up with the rest of the world. Well used to receiving awards, the recipients did not think such honours were given to pop stars. But these were no ordinary pop musicians, as their groundbreaking 6th studio album showed. Starting almost from scratch in mid-October, the Beatles completed Rubber Soul in a month. Add in the double A-side single Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out, and it meant 16 new songs were released in December. Such a contribution to the entertainment industry, not to mention overseas exports, made the Beatles well worth the seal of royal approval.
Well, she said it was a pleasure giving it me.
And you, Paul?
She said, how long have you been together for me?
With whom? With the boys?
Yeah, with us. I said many years, and Ringo said 40 years. That's my story.
And Ringo, what about you?
She said to me, did you start it? And I said, no, they did, nodding to the other boys. I was the last to join.
And John?
She said, have you been working hard? And I said, no, we're having a holiday, you see, because I couldn't think what to say. I couldn't remember what we were doing.
With John and Ringo married, how long before Paul follows George, who's just married 21-year-old model Pattie Boyd?
George and Pattie took their vows in January 1966, the start of a year in which the Beatles put personal preference before the demands placed on them. The groom's proud parents saw the youngest of their 4 children marry, Paul acting as best man. John and Ringo were holidaying abroad, and the newlyweds were soon on their way to Barbados, as the group recharged their batteries after the gruelling impositions of the previous year. It would be April before they returned to the studio, and a further month before their first live performance of the year, on the 1st of May, a 15-minute spot in the NME Poll Winners concert at Wembley's Empire Pool, which will be their last on home soil. In June, with the new single Paperback Writer climbing the charts, the final world tour began in Germany. Reluctant to jump through the usual performance hoops to plug the latest release, they hit on the idea of making a promotional video. Long before the birth of MTV, the Beatles, as usual, led the way.
No further comment necessary. Enough to say that the 4 famous members of the Order of the British Empire were performing in Munich. 5,000 delirious Deutsche teenagers had paid up to £4 each to undergo emotional demolition.
From there, it was on to Tokyo and the Philippines. America was next. Any hope that a return to familiar territory would bring predictable results proved well wide of the mark. The storm was brewing before they touched down. A magazine interview in which John had spoken of the demise of Christianity had not gone down well, especially in the Bible Belt. And a matter-of-fact assessment of the relative popularity of the Beatles and Jesus prompted some radio stations to ban Beatles music. Despite the animosity in some quarters, there remained the die-hard fans and reporters keen to record anything a Beatle had to say.
Is this your first trip south?
No, we've been to Texas before.
Where are you going when you leave here?
I'm Cincinnati, that's it.
Cincinnati, and then how long are you going to be in the States?
About two more weeks.
2 more weeks?
Yes.
What did you have for lunch?
Oh, I didn't eat much. Anyway, I must go, it's getting boiling.
All right, thank you very much.
The latest album, Revolver, had just been released. Not that any of the new songs featured on the set list. In some cases, it wouldn't even have been possible. The new single paired Eleanor Rigby, featuring a double-string quartet, and Yellow Submarine, where anything to hand was clanked, dragged or rattled. For the tour, the group played music they had long since left behind. Meanwhile, the row which had seen Beatles records tossed onto public bonfires went on. It was an old story, rehashed and edited to create sensational headlines. But the adverse reaction was real enough.
What difference has all this row made to this tour, do you think? Any at all? Paul?
I don't think it's made much difference. It's made it more hectic. It's made all the press conferences mean a bit more. People said to us, last time we came, all our answers were a bit flippant. And they said, why isn't it this time? And the thing is, the questions are a bit more serious this time. It hasn't affected any of the bookings. The bookings have been, the people coming to the concerts have been the same, except for the first show in Memphis, which was a bit down, but so what?
The disc jockey, Tommy Charles, who started this row off, has said that he won't play your records until you've grown up a little. How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't mind if he never plays them again.
You see, this is the thing, everyone seems to think that when they hear us say things like this, that we're so childish, you can't say things like that unless you're a silly little child. But
and if he was grown up, he wouldn't have done the thing, because he only did it for a stunt anyway. So, who's he to say about growing up? Who is he?
Who is this guy?
Who is he?
Who?
Apart from that, it's great.
Having a swinging tour.
Do you feel that Americans are out to get you, that this is all developing into something of a witch hunt?
No, we thought it might be that kind of thing. I think a lot of people in England did, because there's this thing about, when America gets violent, gets very hung up on a thing, it tends to have this sort of Ku Klux Klan thing around it.
It seems to me you've always been successful because you've been outspoken and direct and forthright and all this sort of thing. Does it seem a bit hard to you that people are now knocking you for this very thing?
Yes, Richard. It seems very hard. It seems hard, free speech.
But is it possible just to say what you think all the time? What about 14-year-old teenagers who think you're absolutely marvellous and can't bear to be heard?
See, we're not, when we say anything like that, we don't say it as older people seem to think, to be offensive. We mean it helpfully, and if it's wrong, what we say, okay, it's wrong, and people can say, you're wrong about that one. But in many cases, we believe it's right, we're quite serious about it.
But do you mind being asked questions, for example, in America, people keep asking you questions about Vietnam. Does this seem useful?
Well, I don't know, if you can say that war's no good and a few people believe you, then it may be good, I don't know. You can't say it too much, though, that's the trouble.
It seems a bit silly to be in America and for none of them to mention Vietnam as if nothing was happening.
But why should they ask you about it? You're successful entertainer.
That is the thing.
Because Americans always ask showbiz people what they think about it. So do the British, Showbiz, you know how it is. But you've just got to, you can't just keep quiet about anything that's going on in the world unless you're a monk. Sorry, monks, I didn't mean it, I meant actually.
The attempt to pour oil on troubled waters didn't prevent the odd, unnerving experience. If a firecracker went off during a show, there was a moment's apprehension in case it had been a gunshot. Even without that perceived threat, the group knew that the concert tours had to stop. Artistically, they delivered little satisfaction. A band experimenting with tape loops and playing instruments backwards was not going to be content with serving up old hits. Financially, they were still lucrative, though not all of the final 18 American shows were sellouts. The writing was on the wall, and as ever, the Beatles were ahead of the curve. No one who attended the final show at San Francisco's Candlestick Park on the 29th of August 1966 was aware of its significance. The domestic tour, penciled in for the autumn, was erased from the diary, and the appetite to return to the arena stage never returned. Henceforth, they were a studio band. It was late November when the Beatles
together in the new year.
Yeah, we won't be too... The thing is, you see, to do things together, the four of us, it's going to be the old things all over again, you know.
You don't want to do that?
No, we don't want to do, you know, what we've done already. So the thing is, because of the film, you know, we can't get a decent script, or we're still trying for one. If we don't do that, we'll most probably all do something else different, you know, for next year.
On your own?
Yes, but I mean, it's not like breaking up. We'll still be coming back together at the end of it.
Do you foresee a time when, in fact, the Beatles won't be together and that you'll all be on your own?
No.
Do you get? Have you got tired of each other?
No.
No? Have you got anything lined up on your own? Film parts, for example.
Well, there may be one if we don't do one together early next year. To save. See, I'm sort of out of it there because with John and Paul, they can still write even though we're sort of not working together. And George can, you know, learn his sitar and do things like that. And I've just been sitting round.
Getting bored?
No, getting fat.
But have you fed up of being sort of Beatles,
the thing is,
Beatlemania?
We can't do a tour like we've been doing all these years because our music's progressed, we've used more instruments. It'd be soft us going on stage, the four of us, and trying to do the records we've made with orchestras and, you know, bands and things. So we'd have to, if we went on stage, we'd have to have a whole lineup of men behind us.
Are you getting bored of being the Beatles after all this time?
No. I'm having a great time. Merry Christmas to you. Long time since I've seen you.
Thank you very much, Ringo.
That's all right, thank you.
Are you going to work now?
Well, I'll see what they're up to. I think it may be tea time with any luck. Bye.
In 1967, the Beatles were searching for new meaning in their lives. They flirted with the idea of establishing an island commune in Greece, but would soon cast their eyes further eastward for enlightenment and inspiration. At the end of 1966, the Beatles recorded Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, intended to be part of a concept album reflecting on their Liverpool roots. That was abandoned, the two songs instead paired in a new single. Paul had a fresh idea for the next LP, for the most recognisable band on the planet, to adopt a new identity. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, released in June 1967, would become the biggest-selling studio album of all time. 3 weeks after Sgt. Pepper's release, the Beatles represented Britain in a live television broadcast beamed round the world. John wrote All You Need Is Love, a catchy tune with simple lyrics fit for a multinational audience. It was another artistic triumph, but for one Beatle, also a period of personal upheaval. Paul's long romance with Jane Asher was waning. His drug-taking was one point of issue. The use of mind-altering substances was never Jane's scene. Paul went before the cameras to make clear where the responsibility lay for bringing a private matter to public attention.
Paul, how often have you taken LSD?
Well, 4 times.
And where did you get it from?
Oh, you know, I mean, if I was to say where I got it from, you know, it's illegal and everything. It's silly to say that, you know, so I'd rather not say that.
Don't you believe that this was a matter which you should have kept private?
But the thing is, you know, that I was asked a question by a newspaper, and the decision was whether to tell a lie or to tell him the truth, you know. I decided to tell him the truth. But I really didn't want to say anything, you know, because if I'd had my decision, you know, if I had it my way, I wouldn't have told anyone, you know, because I'm not trying to spread the word about this. But the man from the newspaper is the man from the mass medium, you know. I'll keep it a personal thing. If he does too, you know, if he keeps it quiet. But he wanted to spread it, so it's his responsibility, you know, for spreading it, not mine.
But you're a public figure, and you said it in the first place, and you must have known that it would have made the newspapers.
Yes, but to say it, you know, is only to tell the truth. I'm telling the truth, you know. I don't know what everyone's so angry about.
Well, do you think you have now encouraged your fans to take drugs?
I don't think it'll make any difference, you know. I don't think my fans are going to take drugs just because I did, you know. But the thing is, that's not the point anyway, you know. I was asked whether I had or not. And then from then on, the whole bit about how far it's going to go and how many people it's going to encourage is up to the newspapers and up to you, you know, on television. I mean, you're spreading this now at this moment. This is going into all the homes, you know, in Britain. And I'd rather it didn't, you know. But you're asking me the question. You want me to be honest. I'll be honest, you know.
But as a public figure, surely you've got a responsibility to lots and
no,
lots
it's
of
you've got
teenagers.
the responsibility. You've got the responsibility not to spread this now. You know, I'm quite prepared to keep it as a very personal thing, if you will too. If you'll shut up about it, I will.
The Beatles had used drugs as a gateway to heightened perception and deeper consciousness. The pursuit of spiritual growth took its next turn when they became disciples of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He taught transcendental meditation, which offered enlightenment and greater self-awareness to its subscribers. It was Eastern mysticism packaged for Western sensibilities. The message of love, peace and fulfillment drew the group to a seminar in Bangor, the scenes at Euston Station reminiscent of the trappings of Beatlemania. In the confusion, Cynthia Lennon was left behind on the platform, emblematic of a relationship heading for the buffers. Brian Epstein was due to join the retreat later, but tragedy lay just around the corner for a man whose personal life was as chaotic as his professional life was successful. While in North Wales, the Beatles learned of the death of the man who had guided their career since December 1961. Brian Epstein played a key role in the rise of the Mersey Sound, managing artists such as Cilla Black, Billy J. Kramer and Jerry and the Pacemakers, who were among the mourners at his memorial service. But there was a special bond with the Beatles, a bond he thought threatened when they stopped touring. 32-year-old Epstein was an inveterate drug user, and it was an accidental overdose that killed him in August 1967. The Beatles were on their own. The group had already started work on a new project, and in the wake of Epstein's death, decided to throw themselves into it. Paul again took the reins with an idea for a free-form film revolving round a mystery coach trip, a road trip full of Beatle enchantment. As well as the title track, the musical interludes included Fool on the Hill and I Am the Walrus. They rescued a film that was too random for many tastes when it aired over Christmas. The group shrugged off the bad press, and the Magical Mystery Tour would later be praised as a freewheeling counterculture delight. Magical Mystery Tour was still in production when the Beatles attended the premiere of John's 1966 film How I Won the War. The part of Private Gripweed in Dick Lester's anti-war satire didn't warrant star billing, but a Beatle attached to any project was good for business. John would pinpoint the period of its making as the moment when he first contemplated life as an ex-Beatle. It was just after shooting Wrapped in late 1966 that he first crossed the path of conceptual artist Yoko Ono. There was an immediate meeting of minds, though the relationship would take over a year to germinate. Paul had been the driving force throughout 1967, and it was another McCartney song, Hello Goodbye, that gave the band their latest #1 at the end of the year. Ringo also returned to film acting, with a cameo in Candy, while George's preoccupation with the sitar reflected his growing interest in Eastern culture and philosophy. It was an attraction shared by all the group when they went to India in February 1968, a trip to the Maharishi's ashram in Rishikesh that had been deferred following Brian Epstein's death. With McCartney's Fats Domino-inspired Lady Madonna topping the chart at home, they embarked on an open-ended spiritual retreat. Ringo and Maureen were soon on the plane home. Paul and Jane Asher, now formally engaged, were next to decamp. John and George were the last to decide the Maharishi might not hold the answers to their quest. John poured his disillusionment into a new song, Sexy Sadie, a veiled sideswipe at the Guru. George left too, though India remained his spiritual home. John, Paul and George each returned with songs for the new album. But this wealth of material meant increased competition for space on the LP. 1968 was a year of personal upheaval. John declared his love for conceptual artist Yoko Ono. Paul's engagement to Jane Asher was called off, with a new love waiting in the wings. Neither George nor Ringo's marriages would stand the test of time. The Beatles had been on the wrong end of some early business decisions. Older and wiser, they decided to join the corporate ranks themselves. Apple Corps was conceived as a benevolent enterprise, Western-style communism, Paul called it. All manner of dubious ventures were funded, but Apple Music was the organisation's profitable centre. Mary Hopkin was one of Apple's early success stories, but it was the boss's own output that gave the label its gold-plated core. The Beatles' first Apple release was Hey Jude, Paul's message of reassurance to Julian Lennon as his parents called it a day. Contracted to do another feature film, the group found a neat way to meet their obligations with minimal input.
We're just in it as drawings, and it's like us animated goes through it, you know.
But did Mystery Tour put you off making a film completely yourselves?
Yeah, we're only ever going to be cartoons forever now, because they really put us off those.
It's a new career piece.
Those no good damn critics.
The film makes, the cartoon makes a bit of fun of the Maharishi. Does this mean that you've finished with him now? He's
Well,
a
it's
figure of fun.
not finished with, you know, but we're over that phase. It was a bit of a phase. But he's still a nice fella and everybody's fine, but we don't go out with him anymore.
The recording sessions for the new album began in late May and lasted over 4 months. Collaboration was now a rarity, as each presented new material for the collection that became known as the White Album. Even with an expanded double set, George still found his songs squeezed in an eclectic mix. As the finishing touches to the White Album were being applied, John and Yoko appeared in court for drug possession. For the group, the bigger issue was John's insistence that Yoko be present at recording sessions, breaking an unwritten rule. It was a sign of the malaise that had set in, the fragmentation that would gather pace in 1969. The growing tensions were palpable when the four returned to the studio in January 1969. Ringo had already walked out during the White Album sessions. George would also reach breaking point after feeling marginalised once too often. Paul was the glue holding them together. His keenness to keep the show on the road was doomed to fail. Yet there were moments when frustrations were put aside and the old magic recaptured. On the 30th of January, they took to the roof of the Apple building to give what would be their farewell public performance. Even Paul accepted that the fraught January sessions had done nothing to help rewind the clock to happier times, though they did produce the next #1 single, Get Back. None of the other Beatles attended Paul's marriage to Linda Eastman in March 1969. Having made her name photographing pop stars, Linda found herself in front of the lens, the envy of millions of adoring female fans. Like Yoko Ono, she was a divorcee with a child. And like Yoko, whose intrusion into the inner circle caused much unrest, Linda would be an indirect source of ill feeling in the group when the legal fur began flying. And Paul appointed her father, who was a lawyer, to act for him.
Congratulations. How did you enjoy your wedding breakfast?
Fine, thank you. Lovely, yes.
The wedding was delayed an hour. What happened there?
Brother Mike was on British Railways again, so he got held up, and he was best man, so we waited for him.
When did you decide to get married, Paul?
About a week ago.
What prompted it?
Just, you know, so we decided to do it instead of thinking about it.
Linda, how do you feel about it all? You're obviously terribly happy. How are you feeling this morning?
Terribly happy.
That sounds good enough.
Unquote.
Linda, you've been described as a New York socialite. Does this mean you'll be spending much of your time in New York?
No.
Where will you be living?
In London.
In London. Paul, what about you? How do you feel to be the father
Yes, I'll
to
be
a
living in
6-year-old?
London.
You'll be living in London. How about being the father to a 6-year-old child?
It's terrible. It's terrible. I hate it. I hate it, and it's going to be a terrible burden. I do. It's horrible. Yeah. You're on the telly. You're on the telly. Quick.
Wait, are you going on a honeymoon anywhere?
We may get away in a couple of days, but I've got some work and stuff still to do.
So that gets in the way of the honeymoon?
It does, yeah.
Where are you going to go to when you've
I don't
finished
know.
your work?
I haven't thought of anything yet.
What are you going to do for the rest of the day? You're going to have a celebration later, perhaps?
Yeah, I'll take a bit of a rest first. It's been a bit hectic.
Many of the fans, the girls who have been waiting outside the house and outside the hotel today, seem to be more than upset about this. What do you feel?
I don't know what I feel about that, you know.
This is a problem you've met before.
No, it's okay. I talked to. I don't know. It's just difficult. That. What do you say to that? What?
A week after Paul and Linda's marriage, John and Yoko became man and wife. Where Paul tried to keep his nuptials low-key, John's became a media circus. From Gibraltar, where the ceremony took place, they took in Paris and ended up in Amsterdam. Their suite at the city's Hilton Hotel was almost open house. The world invited along to allow them the platform to convey their peace message.
Bed pieces, we're going to stay in bed for 7 days, sort of, instead of having a private honeymoon. It's a private protest.
For the violence that's going in the world, you see.
To say,
we feel that instead of making war, it's better to just stay in bed. Let's stay in bed for the spring.
And grow your hair.
Yes.
For peace. Let it grow till peace comes. You know.
So this is part of your honeymoon?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
It was politics, performance art and honeymoon rolled into one.
How are you enjoying married life?
It's beautiful, you know. It's beautiful.
Some of the things people have said about you, I haven't been very kind lately.
No.
Does this get you down?
Well, it's so much that it got past being depressing. It's got into a joke again. You know. It was a bit depressing the way they kept picking on Yoko, you know, and saying she was ugly and all personal things like that. But I know she isn't, so.
You don't feel you're being hounded?
No. I mean, the amount of hounding we get, we're going to turn it into what we think is good use of it. If we're going to be hounded, we may as well say what we have to say about peace and things.
What about the future of the Beatles? Do you feel that you're still a group? I mean, you've gone through a lot of phases.
Sure. You know, we're closer now, you know, than we ever were.
Closer than they ever were was a fanciful notion. But John and Paul did roll back the years for the song that was to deliver their 17th and final UK #1. With George and Ringo unavailable, and John keen to record a new song detailing the events surrounding his wedding, he and Paul put aside their differences. Completed in a single session, with the two sharing all instruments and vocals, the recording of the ballad of John and Yoko was more akin to the early days, a handful of takes and a few overdubs. It met Paul's wish for them to get back to what they knew and did best. But for John, the avant-garde projects undertaken with Yoko took increasing precedence. Before work on their final studio album, Abbey Road, was complete, John had become the first band member to release a solo single. Give Peace a Chance, recorded in a Montreal hotel suite, was credited to the Plastic Ono Band, but still carried the Lennon-McCartney songwriting stamp.
Can we now expect some kind of solo John Lennon act?
I don't think I'd perform solo at all, you know. If I feel like performing, I'll perform, you know. I mean, would you call Give Peace a Chance a solo performance? Maybe it is, you know, but I just do play it by ear, you know. If I feel like doing it, I do it.
Can you describe your new act together? What is howling?
That's an expression that's not so intellectualized as words, you know. It's just like...
pure sound.
Show me
pure
what
sound.
is.
Pure
Well, anything. Wow, that's howling.
You know, something like that.
George finally emerged from the songwriting shadow of Lennon and McCartney with Something, the first of his songs to be granted A-side status. It was too little, too late. Preoccupied with Eastern philosophy, religion and music, he too embraced the prospect of life beyond the Beatles. The Abbey Road sessions, which showcased George's talent, were not quite so fractious as those that began the year. But it was truce, not reconciliation. Abbey Road was a show of unity and purpose before the inevitably painful split. Ringo's latest venture saw him back on the film set, co-starring with Peter Sellers in The Magic Christian. As an occasional vocalist with no pretension to be a composer, it seemed that he would find the void left by the Beatles biggest to fill. Yet he was the first to release a solo album, the start of a flourishing new career. When it came, the very announcement of the divorce did little to ease the tensions. Paul's unilateral announcement in April 1970 that he was leaving the band came a month after the release of Let It Be. John had voiced his intention to quit the band months earlier, dissuaded from going public for commercial reasons. Paul had stolen a march, but he was content that both were now agreed that the Beatles had run its course. As the group became mired in legal dispute, the last two releases swiftly followed. In May 1970, almost a year after the four had gathered at Abbey Road for the final time, the Let It Be album was issued. America also had one more single, The Long and Winding Road, taking the band's tally of US #1s to 20. And so, at the end of the decade they defined, the Beatles were no more. Each forged new creative alliances, explored different artistic avenues, enjoyed fresh triumphs. Their separate achievements were considerable, yet for many, the accomplishments of that unique collective remain popular music's gold standard. From the pulsating verve of the early hits to the multi-layered sophistication of the studio years, the Beatles crafted wonderful songs from a seemingly inexhaustible well. When they went to the studio, magic invariably happened. The kind of alchemy most musicians hope to experience once, they repeated time and again. As if producing the sound that made Britain the centre of the 1960s pop scene wasn't enough, the Beatles had the look, the style and personality to go with it. Simultaneously, they were the hottest and coolest band on the planet. By the time the legal dispute had ground its way to a conclusion in 1975, a thaw had set in. Beatles played on other Beatles records, but with John's death in 1980, all hope of the four performing together again was extinguished. The Beatles were a band of brothers who grew up before our eyes. The intensity of that 8-year period brought a golden dividend, but also carried a heavy price. As George put it, the fans gave their money and their screams, but the recipients of the adulation gave their nervous systems. Thankfully, they had energy enough to keep the show on the road for as long as they did. We are all fortunate that four Liverpudlians, born less than 3 years apart, found each other and decided to make music together. In 1970, the Fab Four were no more, but they were still fab, and they still are.